My name is my name is Sara Riggare. I had my first symptoms of Parkinson's disease around 1984 when I was in my early teens. I'm an engineer by training, and I was eventually formally diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2003 when I was 32. My main Parkinson's symptoms are to do with the slowness and rigidity, as well as posture and gait. And I frequently get freezing of gait when I'm out walking. I don't have a tremor, which is probably the usual thing with Parkinson's, that you have a tremor, but I actually don't. In 2010, I decided I wanted to try to combine my engineering skills with my patient experiences and try to improve things for myself and others with chronic diseases. So I started studying at the master's program in health informatics at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. And now I'm employed at Uppsala University in Sweden, and I'm currently finalizing my PhD thesis with Professor Bas Bloem in the Netherlands. This talk has the title, Why and How I Use Technology to Track My Parkinson's. Well, spoiler alert, I actually don't. At least not in the way I think most people think I do. And I will elaborate on that, of course, but the short explanation is it's complicated. Let's start with the part of track my Parkinson's of this statement. As we all know, Parkinson's is a very complex disease with a wide variety of motor and non-motor symptoms. And it's primarily diagnosed based on subjective observations of motor symptoms only. And these motor symptoms include tremor, bradykinesia, rigidity, and gait and posture. We also don't have an objective biomarker to know how much worse we are from one year to another, or to modulate our treatment. I sometimes say that I have diabetes envy. And with this, I mean that I, in a way, envy people with type 1 diabetes because they have a clear objective biomarker that they can use to manage their treatment and to learn about their own condition. Whereas we, with Parkinson's, as well as with many others, this is to do with the brain and behavior, we don't have objective measures. This means that it's very difficult to know what to track. Would it be interesting to track tremor? It might be, but to know it's important to know why you're tracking and why would you track tremor? Hopefully to improve it. And that way you would need to know what you want to use that tracking for. Just tracking is probably not useful if you don't know what to do with it, if you don't have a purpose. For me, maybe for tracking falls would be interesting. Sure, it probably would, but I kind of know when I fall, so I don't need to track it. What I would want to do is probably to reduce the number of falls or prevent falls. And this is more difficult to do, certainly, because I would want to know what I do when I don't fall, when I probably would have fallen if I wouldn't have done what I did. So and it's probably almost impossible to be able to track things that don't happen, that is a fall that didn't occur. So let's look at the technology part of the statement in question. As an engineer, I certainly like technology, and I've tried a lot of different technologies for tracking Parkinson's. I've used smartphones, obviously, and I've used activity trackers in different kinds. Excuse me. I've also tried tracking my brain waves, as you can see in the upper left picture there. And I've certainly used video games both to train my brain and body as well as track. But what I've learned from this is the most important thing I've learned is the burden of tracking is significant. With this, I mean that tracking takes time, effort, and energy. And this time, effort, and energy would maybe be better used in some other way. Because I track to be able to live as well as I can with my Parkinson's. And that means that I don't want to track just for the sake of tracking. I want to track for a purpose. And when I'm well enough, I don't want to track. I want to get on with life. I want to do what I want to do with my life. And I don't want to spend that time tracking. Sensors certainly have a place in tracking, for sure. And sensors work really well for objective measures, such as weight, temperature, blood sugar, etc. But these objective measures, we don't have one of those for Parkinson's, as we know. And as of yet, we don't have a clear connection between these objective measures and state of a Parkinson's disease person's sort of everyday life. So at this point, these objective measures are probably not very useful for Parkinson's. It's very easy to capture movement with sensors, with accelerometers. It's very easy to capture movement that you could potentially use for analyzing and tracking tremor and other movement-related symptoms. The problem is that it's really hard analyzing these data. So what is the normal movement that you would want to have? What is optimal movement? What is the intended activity? These are all very, very difficult questions to resolve. So let's go to the why and how part of this statement. And this is where this is where it gets interesting, in my opinion. The one important thing to know is that not everything that can be counted counts. And not everything that counts can be counted, which means that not everything is always measurable and quantifiable, but it can be very important nevertheless. And so it's difficult to track something that you can't count, right? And it's also important to think about different perspectives. Who's asking the questions that the tracking is supposed to answer? That's a very important aspect. And I've come across far too many solutions looking for a problem in my time. With this, I mean, I've come across lots and lots of entrepreneurs and startups who think they've come up with the ultimate idea, the ultimate solution to track movement. And then they want to apply that on some health condition or illness or disease. And then they go to often is Parkinson's because it's known to be a movement disorder. While we of course know that it's much more than that. And that's start with the right way to solve a problem in optimally. You have to start with the question itself. What is the question you're trying to answer? So a bit about my tracking experiences. When I track specific aspects for limited periods of time. For instance, I track maybe to prepare for a doctor's appointment, or when I think I have a new symptom, or when I think that my medication schedule needs tweaking. And then I track medication timings and combinations in different ways. And I track some sort of function, like how well my body is behaving, or how stiff I feel, or how well I can walk at that time. And then very importantly, I track context. I make notes of what I'm doing and what other observations, like if I'm dyskinetic, or maybe if I had a bad night's sleep, I note that, because that's important when interpreting the results and analyzing the data. And sharing methods is probably more important than sharing data. I'll explain. As I said in the beginning, most people probably think I track more than I do. And a lot of people probably also think that I have a lot of data about myself. I actually don't. But the data I have is probably mostly makes sense only to me, because my data is very personal. So I wouldn't mind sharing data, but I don't see the point, because I don't see how anyone else would be able to make sense of my data for themselves. Whereas the methods I use, how I'm evaluating myself and what I'm doing to understand my condition, that's the methods. That's probably much more interesting for others to learn and know about. And if you're interested in my academic publications, you can find links to them on this page here. So my 5 top tips for tracking my Parkinson's disease. Technology doesn't solve anything by itself, but it can add value if used properly. My most frequently used technology these days is probably Google Forms, which is nothing more than a glorified pen and paper and a watch, because what it does is it gives me a timestamp when I make a note in it. And I can also add the context, notes for context. Reasons, as I've said, why do you want to track? Do you want to track because your doctor has told you so, or do you want to track because you want to learn something yourself? Both these are valid and can bring value, but it's important to know your specific reasons to tracking. Actionable. If it's not actionable, don't track it. If you don't know what to do with the results, if you just track for tracking's sake, I don't think that's very useful. I think that's often a waste of time and energy. It's important to know how we want to use the data you collect. And context, as I said, the devil is in the details. So if your doctor has told you to track, and the doctor doesn't know the context, like as I said earlier, if you had a bad night's sleep, or if you're dyskinetic, or if you've eaten something that didn't agree with you or something, the interpretation of the data will probably be wrong, and the decisions will be more difficult to make based on the data. Knowledge and learning are key. And if you are to learn from your tracking, you have to be involved in the tracking yourself. You have to be participating. And even if you're not part of analyzing the data or actually charting the data, you definitely have to be a part of discussing the data's result if you're to learn everything yourself. These were my 5 top tips, and I have made an abbreviation to help you remember them more easily. I hope you find this useful. Thank you for listening.